My stepmom sold my dad's entire watch collection worth over $250,000 just 1 week after his funeral. When I confronted her, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "They were just sitting there." I replied, "So is this lawsuit I'm about to file?" Hi everyone, I'm Maya, and I need to tell you about the most shocking betrayal I've ever experienced. My stepmom sold my dad's entire watch collection worth over $250,000 just 1 week after his funeral. When I confronted her, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "They were just sitting there." I replied, "So is this lawsuit I'm about to file?" I know what you're thinking. Watches? Really? But this isn't just about timepieces. This is about greed, betrayal, and a woman who showed her true colors the moment my father couldn't protect what he loved most. Before I dive into this mess, let me introduce you to the players in this family drama that destroyed everything I thought I knew about trust. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 28, work in marketing here in Chicago, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had a pretty normal blended family situation. My dad, Robert Chen, was 52 when he passed away from pancreatic cancer. He was this incredible investment banker who worked his way up from nothing, but more importantly, he was the most devoted father you could imagine. After my mom died in a car accident when I was 12, Dad became both parents to me and my older brother Marcus. Marcus is 31, lives in Seattle working as a tech consultant, and he's always been my rock. We're incredibly close, probably because we only had each other and Dad for so many years. Dad raised us as a single parent for over a decade, and honestly, we were this tight-knit trio that could get through anything together. Then 3 years ago, Dad met Stephanie. Stephanie Chen, now 35, used to work in real estate before she married my father. She's blonde, bubbly, and about 17 years younger than Dad was. When they started dating, Marcus and I tried to be supportive. Dad seemed happy, and after years of seeing him alone, we wanted him to find love again. But here's the thing about Stephanie that should have been a red flag from day one. She never really understood Dad's passion for watches. My father had been collecting vintage timepieces since he was 17 years old, working part-time at a jewelry store to save up for his first real watch. Over 25 years, he built this incredible collection of 47 rare watches. We're talking about pieces like a 1953 Rolex Submariner, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, several limited edition Omega Speedmasters. Each watch had a story, a history, and represented years of careful research and investment. Every Sunday afternoon, Dad and I would sit in his study, and he'd tell me about each piece. He'd explain the craftsmanship, the heritage, why certain models were significant in horological history. Those watches weren't just objects to him. They were his passion, his hobby, his way of connecting with me, and honestly, his retirement plan. He always said they'd be worth a fortune someday and that Marcus and I would inherit something truly special. Stephanie never got it. From the moment she moved into our family home, she'd make these little comments about all that old junk cluttering up the house, or why does anyone need so many watches? Dad would just laugh it off, but I could see it bothered him. She'd roll her eyes whenever he'd show a new acquisition to guests, or when he'd spend time maintaining his collection. The tension really started when Dad got sick 6 months ago. I moved back to Chicago from my apartment across town to help take care of him. During those final months, I noticed Stephanie becoming increasingly distant and impatient. She'd complain about the medical bills, the time everything took, how inconvenient Dad's illness was for her social life. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what she did after his funeral. I'm talking about a level of betrayal that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. This woman, who promised to love and honor my father until death do them part, couldn't even wait a full week before she destroyed his legacy. So buckle up, because this story has more twists than you can imagine, and by the end you'll understand why some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. This isn't just about money or watches. This is about justice, family, and what happens when you underestimate a daughter who loved her father more than anything in this world. To understand why what Stephanie did was so devastating, you need to know the kind of man my father was and how those watches became the foundation of our relationship. Robert Chen wasn't just a collector. He was a dreamer who turned his passion into something beautiful, and he made sure I was part of that journey every step of the way. After Mom died when I was 12, Dad could have easily fallen apart. Instead, he threw himself into being the best single parent possible. Marcus was already 15 and dealing with teenage rebellion, but I was still this lost little girl who didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Dad knew he had to find ways to connect with both of us, and for me, that connection came through his watches. I remember the first time he brought me into his study. I was probably 13, still struggling with grief, and Dad sat me down at his desk where he kept this beautiful wooden display case. He pulled out this vintage Omega Seamaster and said, "Maya, this watch is from 1962. It's older than I am, but look how perfectly it still works." He let me hold it, showed me how to wind it, explained how all the tiny gears work together to keep perfect time. Watches are like people, he told me that day. They might get old, they might need care and maintenance, but if you treat them with respect and understand how they work, they'll be loyal to you forever. That became our thing. Every Sunday afternoon, Dad and I would sit in his study, and he'd teach me about different pieces in his collection. The collection itself was absolutely incredible. Dad started buying watches when he was 17, working weekends at Morrison's jewelry store downtown. His first real purchase was a 1970 Rolex GMT Master that cost him 3 months of part-time wages. He still had it, and it was still his daily wear watch even 30 years later. Over the years, he'd added pieces strategically. He wasn't just buying randomly. Dad researched everything. He'd study market trends, read horological magazines, connect with other collectors. His crown jewel was this 1953 Rolex Submariner, one of the earliest models ever made. He found it at an estate sale in 1995, recognized its significance, and paid $3,000 for it. By the time he passed away, that single watch was worth over $40,000. But Dad didn't just see dollar signs. He saw history, craftsmanship, the evolution of engineering and design. Then there was his Patek Philippe Nautilus, his collection of vintage Omega Speedmasters, including a rare Ed White model, several beautiful Jaeger-LeCoultre pieces, and this stunning 1960s Hoyer Carrera that he wore on his wedding day when he married Mom. Each watch had a story, a moment in time, a reason for being in our family. When Dad married Stephanie 3 years ago, I genuinely tried to welcome her into our lives. She seemed to make Dad happy, and after years of seeing him alone, Marcus and I wanted that for him. But from the very beginning, Stephanie never understood what the watches meant to our family. She'd make these dismissive comments about Dad's expensive hobby, or suggest he should sell some pieces to make room for new furniture. Dad would just smile and change the subject, but I could see it hurt him. These weren't just objects taking up space. They were his legacy, his passion, his way of teaching me about patience, craftsmanship, and the value of investing in quality things that last. Every Sunday, Stephanie would find excuses to leave the house during our watch sessions, rolling her eyes about watch talk again. When Dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, everything changed. I immediately moved back home to help care for him, and that's when I really saw Stephanie's true character. She became increasingly impatient with Dad's illness, complaining about doctor appointments, medication schedules, how his condition was affecting her social life. But the worst part was watching her attitude toward the collection during those final months. She'd make comments about all this clutter when Dad was too weak to respond. She'd suggest selling pieces to help with medical bills, even though Dad's insurance covered everything. I started to realize she wasn't seeing these watches as part of Dad's legacy. She was seeing them as inconvenient obstacles to whatever future she was planning. In his final weeks, Dad pulled me aside and made me promise something. "Maya," he said, his voice weak but determined, "those watches tell the story of my life, and someday they'll be part of yours and Marcus's story too. Promise me you'll take care of them." I promised, never imagining that keeping that promise would require a legal battle with the woman who was supposed to love him most. The funeral was on a Tuesday. By the following Tuesday, Stephanie had already destroyed 25 years of my father's passion and our family's legacy. What happened next still makes me sick to my stomach, but I need you to understand exactly how calculated and cold this betrayal really was. I had given Stephanie some space immediately after the funeral. Grief affects everyone differently, and I thought maybe she needed time to process losing Dad. Marcus had flown back to Seattle for work. planning to return the following weekend to help sort through Dad's belongings. I figured we'd all tackle it together as a family. But I couldn't stop thinking about Dad's promise to me. Those watches needed to be properly secured and cataloged. I knew Dad had detailed insurance documentation for each piece, and I wanted to make sure everything was accounted for before we made any decisions about the collection's future. So that Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after we buried my father, I drove over to the family home around 10 a.m. I still had my key, and I figured Stephanie would appreciate the help getting organized. The house felt eerily quiet when I walked in. I called out, "Stephanie, it's Maya," but got no response. I headed straight to Dad's study, excited to see his beautiful display case again and start the process of honoring his memory. But when I walked into that room, I literally stopped breathing. The custom-built display case that had housed 47 precious timepieces was completely empty. Not a single watch remained. The velvet-lined compartments that had held Dad's life's work were just vacant spaces staring back at me. My heart started pounding. Maybe Stephanie had moved them for safekeeping. Maybe she'd put them in a safety deposit box. I practically ran through the house looking for her, and I finally found her in the kitchen, casually sitting at the breakfast table with a cup of coffee and her phone, scrolling through social media like it was any other morning. "Stephanie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where are Dad's watches?" She looked up from her phone with this completely casual expression and said, "Oh, I sold them. They were just sitting there, taking up space." I swear to you, I thought I was having a heart attack. "You what?" "Stephanie, those watches were worth over $250,000. She actually shrugged, like physically shrugged her shoulders. "I got $30,000 for the lot, not bad for old watches that nobody was using." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stephanie, that collection was Dad's life's work. Those watches were his passion, his legacy. You can't just sell them like they're garage sale items." "Maya," she said, setting down her coffee with this patronizing tone, "I'm Robert's widow. Legally, everything in this house belongs to me now. The will doesn't specifically mention the watches, so they're part of the personal property that comes to me. You and Marcus already got the life insurance money. I think that's plenty." That's when I realized this wasn't grief or poor judgment. This was calculated. "Where did you sell them, Stephanie?" "We need to get them back." "I sold them to Goldstein's pawn shop on Milwaukee Avenue yesterday," she said matter-of-factly. "They were thrilled to get such a large collection. The owner said some pieces were already attracting interest from collectors." I felt like I was going to throw up. "Stephanie, do you have any idea what you've done? That 1953 Rolex Submariner alone was worth $40,000. The Patek Philippe was worth $60,000. You sold hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of watches for $30,000. "Well, I guess I'm not a watch expert like you and Robert," she said with this smug smile. "But $30,000 seemed like a fair price for old jewelry." That's when something clicked. "You knew, didn't you? You knew exactly what those watches were worth. You've been planning this." Her expression changed slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." But I was already putting pieces together. All those comments about the watches being clutter. All her suggestions to sell pieces during Dad's illness. Her sudden interest in the will and inheritance details. This wasn't impulsive. This was premeditated. You researched their values, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were doing when you sold them for a fraction of what they're worth. "Maya, you're being dramatic. They were just watches. Robert's gone. They weren't bringing him back." That's when I knew I was looking at a stranger. The woman my father had loved and trusted had just reduced his life's passion to just watches and acted like his death gave her permission to erase everything he cared about. But she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated how far I would go to protect my father's legacy. I left Stephanie's house that day with my hands shaking and my mind racing. But underneath the shock and grief, something else was building. Pure determination. If Stephanie thought she could destroy my father's legacy and get away with it, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. My first stop was Goldstein's pawn shop on Milwaukee Avenue. I needed to see the damage for myself and hopefully salvage whatever I could. The owner, Mr. Goldstein, was this elderly gentleman who'd been running the shop for 30 years. The moment I mentioned my father's watch collection, his face fell. "You must be Robert's daughter," he said sadly. I tried to tell that woman she was making a terrible mistake. I offered her $85,000 for the collection, which was still below market value but much fairer. She insisted she wanted a quick sale and would only accept $30,000 cash. My heart sank further. "How many have you already sold?" 14 pieces, he admitted. The 1953 Rolex Submariner went to a private collector in New York yesterday for $38,000. Your stepmother could have gotten that much for just that one watch if she'd been patient. I felt sick. "Mr. Goldstein, I need to know everything. Who bought what, when, where they went. My father spent his entire adult life building that collection." He pulled out a detailed ledger. This man understood the value of what had been lost. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize when something's not right," he said. "That woman knew those watches were special, but she acted like she couldn't get rid of them fast enough. I even asked if she was sure about the prices, and she said, 'Just give me the cash and get them out of my sight.' That confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't grief or ignorance. This was intentional destruction. Over the next 2 days, I became a detective investigating my own family's betrayal. I started by going through Dad's phone, which thankfully still had all his messages and emails. What I found made my blood boil. 3 weeks before Dad died, Stephanie had been texting with someone named Jake Morrison, her personal trainer from the gym. The messages were devastating. "Can't wait to get out of here," she'd written. "Once Robert's gone, I'll have enough money to start fresh somewhere warm." And Jake had responded, "What about those expensive watches he's always talking about?" Stephanie's reply, "Already researched them. Worth a fortune. Easy money." I screenshot everything and kept digging. Dad's computer revealed even more evidence. Stephanie had been visiting watch auction sites, looking up values for specific pieces in Dad's collection. She'd even contacted several high-end dealers asking about estate sales and quick liquidation of vintage timepieces. The most damning evidence was a Google search history on Dad's computer from Stephanie's user account. 2 weeks before Dad passed, she'd searched "How to Sell Inherited Watch Collection Quickly," "Probate Law Illinois Personal Property," and "Pawn Shops Chicago Vintage Watches." This woman had been planning to steal and destroy my father's legacy while he was dying in the next room. I knew I needed professional help, so I called David Rodriguez, an attorney who'd been Dad's friend since college and had helped him with estate planning. When I explained the situation, David was furious. "Maya, what Stephanie did might be technically legal, but it's morally reprehensible," he said. "However, I think we can build a case for breach of fiduciary duty. As Robert's spouse, she had a responsibility to preserve marital assets, not liquidate them at massive losses for personal gain." David helped me understand our options. While Stephanie might have legal ownership of the watches, her actions suggested fraud and possibly conversion of assets. The fact that she researched their values but accepted a fraction of their worth could be seen as intentional waste of marital property. "We need to move fast," David advised. "Every day that passes, those watches get further dispersed into private collections. I'm going to file an emergency motion to freeze Stephanie's assets and require her to account for the sale proceeds." I also hired a private investigator to track down the sold watches and document everything about Stephanie's relationship with Jake Morrison. Within 48 hours, we discovered they'd been planning to move to Costa Rica together, using Dad's life insurance money and the proceeds from selling his prized collection. But here's what Stephanie didn't count on. She'd messed with the wrong daughter. I wasn't just fighting for watches anymore. I was fighting for justice, for Dad's memory, and to prove that some betrayals have consequences. The war was just beginning, and I was ready to take her down. 3 months after filing the lawsuit, we finally had our day in court. Nothing could have prepared me for the bombshells that were about to explode, destroying not just Stephanie's defense, but revealing the depth of her betrayal in ways I never imagined. The deposition took place in David Rodriguez's law office on a cold Thursday morning in November. Stephanie walked in wearing this expensive black dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled, looking more like she was going to a cocktail party than facing legal consequences for destroying my father's legacy. Her attorney, Michael Sherman, was clearly confident. They'd spent weeks arguing that Stephanie had every legal right to dispose of her deceased husband's personal property, and that my lawsuit was nothing more than a grieving daughter's emotional overreaction. David started with basic questions about the timeline, but I could see he was building toward something bigger. "Mrs. Chen," he said, "can you explain why you chose to sell the entire collection to a pawn shop rather than having it professionally appraised?" "I'm not a watch expert," Stephanie replied smoothly. "I just wanted to clear out space and get a fair price quickly." "A fair price?" David pulled out the insurance documents. "Were you aware that your husband had these watches professionally appraised just 8 months ago for a total value of $247,000? Stephanie's face flickered for just a moment. "I never saw those documents." That's when David dropped the first bomb. "Mrs. Chen, I have evidence from your husband's computer showing multiple searches from your user account for watch auction sites, vintage timepiece values, and specifically researching the worth of several pieces in Robert's collection. How do you explain that?" Her attorney objected, but the damage was visible. Stephanie's composure was starting to crack. "Furthermore," David continued, "we have text message evidence showing communications between you and Jake Morrison, your personal trainer, discussing the financial value of the watch collection and your plans to liquidate everything after Robert's death." That's taken out of context," Stephanie stammered. But David wasn't finished. "Let me read you a text message you sent to Mr. Morrison dated 3 weeks before your husband's death. Once Robert's gone, I'll have enough money to start fresh somewhere warm. Those stupid watches he obsesses over are worth more than he ever told me. Easy money." The room went dead silent. Stephanie's face had gone completely white. Then David played his trump card. "Mrs. Chen, we also have a recording from Mr. Goldstein at the pawn shop. Are you familiar with the Cook County recording laws that allow business owners to record transactions for security purposes?" Her attorney looked confused, but I could see panic in Stephanie's eyes. David pressed play on a small digital recorder. Stephanie's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "Just give me 30,000 cash and get these things out of my sight. I don't care what they're worth to collectors. My husband's dead, and I'm finally free of all his ridiculous hobbies. Me and my boyfriend are moving to Costa Rica next month, and we need liquid cash, not old junk." The recording continued with her laughing about finally getting rid of that old man's junk and joking with Jake on speakerphone about their escape plan. Stephanie completely broke down. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "I never loved him. I married Robert for security, but I felt trapped. He was so obsessed with those watches, always talking about preserving them for his children. I felt like I didn't matter, like I was just waiting around to die in that house surrounded by his precious timepieces." Her attorney was frantically trying to get her to stop talking, but the floodgates had opened. "Jake and I have been together for 2 years," she continued through tears. "We were planning our new life, and those watches were my ticket to freedom. I researched their values for months, waiting for Robert to die so I could finally cash out and start over." The most devastating part came next. I even threw away his stupid watch journals where he wrote about each piece. I burned the photos of him with Maya looking at those watches. I wanted to erase every trace of his obsession because it represented everything I hated about being trapped in that marriage. David looked at me, and I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. We had her. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "you've just confessed to intentional destruction of marital assets, fraud, and conspiracy. Your husband trusted you with his legacy, and you systematically planned to destroy it for personal gain while he was dying." Stephanie's attorney called for a recess, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. After Stephanie's complete breakdown in that deposition room, her attorney knew they had no choice but to settle. Within 2 weeks, we had reached an agreement that felt like justice, even though nothing could truly undo the damage she had caused. The settlement terms were substantial. Stephanie had to pay me $180,000, which was essentially her entire inheritance from Dad, except for a small amount her lawyer insisted she needed for basic living expenses. She also had to sign over all rights to the family home, which meant I could preserve Dad's study exactly as it was. But most importantly, she had to provide a complete accounting of every watch sale, including contact information for buyers and any dealers who had purchased pieces. The legal victory felt good, but the real work was just beginning. I became obsessed with what I called Operation Recovery. Using the settlement money and the detailed information Stephanie was forced to provide, I hired a private investigator who specialized in tracking down stolen and missing collectibles. 6 months after the settlement, I got a call that made everything feel complete. Mr. Goldstein had found another piece, Dad's vintage Omega Seamaster, the very first watch he'd ever shown me in his study when I was 13. A customer had brought it in, and Mr. Goldstein recognized it immediately from the detailed photos I'd provided. He bought it himself and called me before putting it up for sale. As for Stephanie, she moved to Florida with Jake Morrison. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their relationship didn't last 6 months after they got the money. Apparently, betraying a dying man's trust isn't a solid foundation for true love. But here's what I learned from this whole nightmare. Some battles are worth fighting, not for revenge, but for love. Those watches weren't just timepieces. They were the physical representation of my father's passion, our bond, and the values he tried to teach me about patience, quality, and cherishing things that last. Time is the most valuable thing we have, and the watches we choose to keep remind us of the moments that matter most. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was heavy, but I hope it reminds you to protect the things and people that matter most in your life. If you're dealing with family conflicts after losing someone you love, please know that you're not alone. And sometimes, standing up for what's right is the most loving thing you can do. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Have you ever had to fight for something that meant everything to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else going through a similar situation. And if you want to hear more real-life stories about family, justice, and never giving up on what matters most, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Remember, some things are too precious to lose and too important not to fight for. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.